In this week's EV news, the SMMT new car registrations data for March shows that the doom and gloom about EV sales isn't all it's cracked up to be. Indonesia lowers VAT on electric vehicles to just 1%. Gridserve opened 2 new electric charging hubs on the A1. And the MG4 is the second best-selling EV in the UK. Welcome back to another EV news. I know that the upload schedule is all over the place and you haven't seen one of these for a little while. I'm hoping that we can make that a little bit better going forward. The chaos with moving house and stuff is just about to settle down, hopefully. I think we're finally seeing some light at the end of the tunnel after what has been a couple of years of uncertainty and messing around and solicitors and builders and things falling through and all the rest of it. But I think we're almost there. Touch wood. You'll notice got a little bit of a new setup here. A lot of complaints about sound quality and kind of limited in what I can do about that because I film these videos in a completely untreated room, especially because this house is rented. I can't glue acoustic foam everywhere and all that kind of thing. So we're trying something a little bit different. New microphone and obviously it's very much in shot, but I'm hopeful that the increase in sound quality is going to make up for it. Please make sure you like this video as always, convince the algorithm that it's worth watching, and if you're new here, subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on any more EV news or reviews. Let's get started with the SMMT sales figures for March then. There have been a lot of doom and gloom in the news recently about EV sales, particularly focusing on the second-hand market because values do seem to have taken a bit of a tumble. Used prices definitely are falling, but I think it's little more than the market correcting itself. After all, we've spent the past couple of years buying and selling EVs that are a year, 2 years old for very, very close to their brand new list price. And similar was happening with petrol and diesel cars because there was a shortage of new cars due to part shortages, originally due to COVID, that sort of continued with the war in Ukraine and all that stuff. But some of these supply issues are easing. Supply of new cars is definitely getting better. And I think anybody thinking that these high prices were going to continue for used cars, but a little bit delusional really, if people can actually get a new car for X amount, they're not going to pay anywhere near that for a used car. And that has never been the case. It's very unreasonable to expect new cars to not depreciate because nobody wants something secondhand for the same price that they can buy new for. But the SMMT sales figures for March show that new car registrations for EVs remain strong. So any of the doom and gloom and suggestion that people are not buying EVs anymore doesn't seem to be the case. 46,626 battery electric vehicles were registered in March. That represents a market share of 16.2%, which is actually up very slightly from 16.1% in 2022. But there hasn't been that sharp decline that many people have been predicting. Hybrid electric vehicles are the real winner here, like your Toyota self-charging hybrids. 37,252 hybrid electric vehicles were sold. That represents a market share of 12.9% and a 33.3% increase over last year. Clearly the marketing there is winning people over. I think the oh well, it's electrified but you don't need to charge it thing certainly wins some people over. And they probably are a better alternative than pure petrol cars, but I'm not convinced for the majority of use cases that they actually add very much. I know that's a hotly debated topic, and some of you will tell me in the comments that hybrids, self-charging hybrids, whatever you want to call them, are the future and we should all be having them, but I'm not convinced. What I'm surprised to see from March's sales figures though is that plug-in hybrids are actually lagging a little bit. More units were shifted. Market share has fallen from 6.6% of the market to 6.2%. So that suggests to me that the plug-in hybrid isn't quite what people want to be buying when they're buying new. And I mean, a lot of people are very skeptical of plug-in hybrids anyways, saying they're little more than, gaming the company car tax scheme, because if you can do more than a certain number of electric-only miles, you pay much less benefit in kind tax. Nowhere near as low as a full battery electric vehicle, but certainly quite low. And I think a lot of people are at least under the impression that that is why plug-in hybrids even exist at all. But I'm not so black and white with that. I would sooner we were shifting people into vehicles that let them electrify some of their miles And let's be honest, a plug-in hybrid lets you electrify those miles that you do just around town, and in the cases where we probably should be encouraging that. But if you want to make longer journeys, you don't need to think about charging. You can just do that on petrol. It's not perfect, but it's an interim solution, and it's one that I don't think we should be too quick to shun. And I would sooner see plug-in hybrids than just these so-called hybrids, which have a tiny, tiny little battery and can do, a couple of miles electric only. I don't really see the point in those at all. Yes, they increase fuel efficiency in most cases, but a lot of the time the benefit is fairly marginal, and I'd sooner we had plug-in hybrids than just hybrids, but it seems that the market disagrees with me. But the ultimate takeaway from this is that the used market might be falling, but new car registrations are continuing. So to say that people are turning away from EVs is definitely not correct. They're still selling them. And yes, they probably are selling them to company car drivers, salary sacrifice users, and people that can make advantage of the tax breaks there are for EVs. But that doesn't mean that that's not a good thing. At the end of the day, you used to all tell me that, oh, well, used EVs are too expensive, I couldn't possibly afford one. And actually, we need cheap used EVs, and we need the market to sort of stabilise, so we get into a position where the used electric market is just like the used petrol or diesel market is, where there's something for every budget. And as long as new car registrations continue, that should naturally become the case. Next up, I quite like to feature stories from across the globe on this channel. It's primarily UK focused, but I like to occasionally check in on what's going on elsewhere, because mostly it helps us see quite how badly we're doing at this in the UK. And this story from Indonesia definitely caught my eye, because the UK government seems to be doing everything they can to hinder EV adoption, remove incentives, and make it less and less appealing to go electric. Well, the Indonesian government have just announced that they are going to cut VAT on the sale of electric vehicles from the current 11% to just 1%. It's a huge difference that should help drive EV adoption. But there's more to it than that. They don't just want to drive adoption of EVs amongst their citizens, but they actually want to encourage domestic production. They want manufacturers to build EVs in Indonesia, and a lower VAT rate on the sale of them should help them do that. They want to attract investment from companies that will build both cars and batteries in the country. And I can't be the only one that's thinking, that doesn't sound like too bad an idea, does it? The incentive came into effect this month, and it will last for the rest of 2023 at least, and they've also cut VAT on certain types of electric bus. Indonesia is stepping up their efforts to lure investment into domestic production of EVs and batteries to utilise the rich reserves of nickel in the country, which can be processed as part of battery production. Indonesia said last month that it would allocate 7 trillion rupiah, that's $466 million in state funds to subsidise electric motorcycle uptake through 2024. And I mean, it's of little relevance to you guys in the UK, right? Nobody's going to be that bothered really about what Indonesia is doing to encourage EV production and EV sales in their country, but it's a really good example of a country recognising that they can use incentives properly to drive growth in both adoption and in the related industries that support that. I guess there's not much chance of it happening here. I mean, our government seem hell-bent on putting barriers in place of both adoption and manufacturing. I mean, imagine how much different things could be here if we actually encouraged car manufacturers to build EVs here, and we encourage people to, build viable battery plants here. I mean, you've only got to look at British Volt and how much of a disaster that was to say that our government really aren't taking this very seriously, are they? But I don't like to get too political here. I'm sure you've got some strong opinions on this. Do let me know what you think in the comments. Now, something a little bit different. A new section to break up the news a little bit. Used Bargain of the Week. It's actually now possible to find used EVs for sale at prices that you might consider to be a little bit of a bargain, now that prices are softening up a little bit. So I thought we'll have to look around on AutoTrader, see what we can find, and I'll bring it to you, because I think it's quite important to keep a sort of finger on the pulse of what you can buy on the used market. I know I've done dedicated videos on this subject in the past, and I might well continue doing that, but I thought this was a bit of fun and we'd added in something a little bit different. I thought the winner this week had to be this one, a sub £10,000 Leaf 40. It's got 120,000 miles on the clock. It's been busy, so I'm assuming it's ex-private hire, something like that. And that, to me, that's a groundbreaking price point for a 40 kilowatt hour Leaf. People were asking more than that for a 30 only a few months ago. I'm not sure this particular one is actually the bargain that I originally thought it was when I first saw it. I'd probably actually opt for one of these £10,500 examples. So for an extra 500 quid, you're getting something with quite a few less miles on the clock. But for me, the Leaf 40 right now has to be the best value EV around at the moment. If we ignore the CHAdeMO thing and the thermal management thing, the 40 doesn't suffer the same battery degradation problems that the 24 or the 30 did, or at least not to the same extent. And it has enough range to be usable, but you can make longer journeys in it if you need to. I really do think for a lot of people looking, if you've got a 10 grand budget, you can't go far wrong with the Leaf 40, and it's definitely one you should be looking at. Now let me know what you think. Would a cheap Leaf 40 be your choice if you had about 10 grand to spend? I'd be really interested to hear what alternatives you would consider. I think for me, for my usage, if I wanted to replace the diesel that I'm currently having to use for my stupid commute once every couple of weeks, I would need the bigger battery version. I probably need the 62 to do it in proper comfort, not ever having to think about charging. I can charge at the office. It could probably do there and back in one go if it really had to. That for me would be the choice at this sort of lower end of the market. And there are some 62s around for about a 15 grand kind of mark. But I was very surprised to see this one for 20k. It's nearly new, very low mileage. But what caught my eye is it's for sale from a dealer that very much specialises in supercars, redline specialist cars. I'm pretty sure some of the supercar focused YouTube channels, that's one of the dealers they buy their cars from. And I would not expect a nearly new Leaf to be for sale there. I'd love to know what the story is. Maybe someone's, come into some money and decided to give up driving their Leaf for Uber, and they've bought, a Lamborghini instead. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but that looks like a little bit of a bargain. It's a year old. It's got hardline miles on the clock, 20 grand. It seems pretty good to me. But cheap Leaf 40 though, definitely the focus of this section this week. Next up, I love a bit of infrastructure news. So charging hubs opening are almost always going to feature on EV news. It's definitely something worth noting and worth celebrating, I think. Gridserve have announced 2 new electric super hubs. Now, if you remember, that's the name that they give to their installations of multiple ultra-rapid chargers at motorway services. 2 of those are now open for business at Moto Washington North and South on the A1M. There's 6 350 kilowatt chargers at each site now up and running, and that's a massive expansion in charging capability in the area. Now, I can hear you say already, why 6? Why not more than 6? 6 definitely isn't enough. Well, the strategy that Gridserve are employing with these is based on demand and based on predicted demand in the area. Sometimes they will only install 6, but they will cable and they'll size the grid connection for 12, and they will expand that in the future if there is demand. So they're not chucking an extra few hundred grand at chargers that might not necessarily get fully utilised. They're going to monitor the utilisation and expand as necessary. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember which site it is, but there's one site where they put in 6, it very quickly got overwhelmed, and another 6 are going in very, very soon. And that's very much their strategy. So before you're too quick to moan about, oh, that's not enough, they do seem to actually be planning for capacity, and what they're doing, it seems, is spreading their investment in a more sensible manner. It doesn't make sense to chuck an extra 500 grand, say, at something that is going to be underutilised. I'd rather they were putting another 6 on another site, and that seems to be what the priority is here. So I don't think there's too much to complain about, really. That certainly sounds good to me. After all infrastructure news is good news, especially when it's a multi-unit hub from a solid operator like Gridserve. I know you'll have the usual gripes about pricing. 66 pence per kilowatt hour is the current tariff at those chargers. And I agree with you, it's expensive, but we need to build the infrastructure, and unfortunately at the moment, with the wholesale price of energy the way it is, that is going to mean charging is going to be a little bit more expensive for the moment. I'd love to see some government support in this area, and I'm hoping that as wholesale prices start to fall, we will start to see these tariffs reduce. I know that some of you will say, well, that's never going to happen, but time will tell. We know there's loads more to come from Gridserve as they continue to expand, and you can be sure that I will continue to cover it on this channel. And finally, MG had a record first quarter of UK sales. In the first 3 months of 2023, they were the second best-selling manufacturer of electric cars, second only to Tesla. Their overall sales were 20,679 units, although that does include petrol cars. That's a 49.4% increase over last year. Over 5,200 of those were the MG4 EV. And that's hardly surprising, is it? For two reasons. It's incredibly good value for money, and they can actually seem to supply them in quantity. I know that quite a few of you that ordered the ZS EV have actually switched your order to the MG4 because MG said, well, we can actually get you one, whereas the ZS has long lead times. So I do think that is one of the driving reasons for the MG4's success. That and the fact it is actually good. The MG4 is very well reviewed, gets loads of praise, and if you'd like to see what I thought of it when I drove one, check out this next video.